Welcome to the Eating at a Meeting podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Stuckrath, dietary needs expert, certified meetings manager, certified food protection manager. I have searched the globe to find people and businesses who are creating safe, sustainable, and inclusive food and beverage experiences for their employees, guests, and communities. In each episode, you will find authentic conversations about how food and beverage impacts inclusion, sustainability, culture, community, health, and wellness. I know that sounds like a lot, but we're going to cover it all. Are you ready to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line? If so, let's go.
I'm Tracy Stuckrath, and this is Devon Pasha, and we're at IMEX. And the last day, and we're both very excited to be here for the last day. It has been a fun 4 days.
Yes.
Long 4 days.
Yes. All right, I'm at the I'm exhausted part of IMEX.
Oh my God, I love that. Yeah, I'm excited to be here, and now I'm exhausted and ready to go home. But no, it's been a great 4 days. Have you guys had a good time in the booth?
Yeah, it's been a more interesting booth just because of like placement, and it's like super interesting in terms of design. Like just like if we're 3 feet to the left or 4 feet to the right, like how different people interact with us.
Wow.
It's been a good education and a really good show in terms of being able to share a thought leadership with other event professionals. So definitely great. And of course, the benefit of IMEX is catching up with old friends and new friends and making friends. This has been amazing.
Well, and then on that note, I just threw the title on here because it says Event Profs and Elevators Moving Conversations for Better F&B at Events. And we ran into each other on an elevator.
Yeah. It was so funny that we were back in Vegas, actually. And got to see each other in the elevator, I think crossing paths or checking in. And it was so nice to reconnect. And then we did that thing where we kept holding the elevator door open. We're like, wait, I'm like, no, we just walk onto your floor and have this conversation. So no, it was great. That actually sparked another kind of brainchild to grow and actually have this conversation together.
Exactly. Because we were attending an event, and you were planning an event and having challenges with food and beverage. So,
as is always the case, it's the thing that we need the most, the thing that we spend the most money on, and yet it's always the thing that we're judged on, but also that we have like the least control over.
Right, exactly. And why is it that we have the least control over it?
And I think it's like run amok in terms of like how it's like capitalism. It's like the food vendors have this and they need to make this much money. And the hotels have to work with only the food vendors that are approved by their purchasing company. So they don't have control because purchasing at the hotels, like, well, these are our vendors that we vetted because of a business decision, but it's not a food decision. And so then the food directors are locked into who they can, get things from, and then that means they're locked into what ingredients they can use to make food. And so it's really this ecosystem that is more on the business side, and it like really starts to remove control from the people who need to make the decisions. And then all the decisions on pricing, all the decisions on what can be brought in, what cannot be brought in, like what could be provided by the customer, what needs to be provided to the customer, it all goes down to business decisions, and the actual humanistic need to feed and be fed is like the last decision on the food chain of I'm just
going to quote that entire thing. That was fantastic. You're welcome. But it's so true, because when we're trying to decide what to serve, you have the poorest of options. And I was telling somebody the other day at an event I did in June, we were eliminating all nuts because we had somebody anaphylactic, and they had 10 options on the snack buffet that were prepackaged because we were doing consumption stuff to make it cheaper. Yeah. And like 6 of the 10 contained nuts of some sort. And I'm like, I need other options because I'm not going to serve the same 3 things every single day. And they sent me back the most disgusting list of food that was available through the provider that they were sanctioned or allowed to purchase from.
Right.
And they weren't thinking outside the box. They weren't like, can you get some red plate cookies, right? That are free of the top 9 out, whatever. I'm like, but they're hindered.
Right. But also they're like in these types of ecosystems, it's like, I can't see past or see outside of the framework of that ecosystem.
Right.
So to say things like, you know what, I need to go to the GM and say, hey, we really need to look into this. Customers are asking for this more. what can I do in order to provide a better service, to create trust and customer loyalty with these people, to say, hey, we do offer this. Oh, maybe that brings us in more business because we're the ones that can think outside the box.
Right.
But so few people in this regimented system can even think to ask that question. They're like, no, I know this is the monster I know. And so I can only think of like, this is the list. I'm only allowed to, like, I can't think outside the list.
Right.
And that's what gets really upsetting, is that we don't give anyone in our business ecosystem a way to say, oh, well, this list does not comply, or this list is not appropriate, or this list doesn't provide the service. So I need to come up with another list, or I need to research options and say, okay, if you need to bring this in because it's accommodating, like, what can I do in terms of, we need to take a vig, or we need to say, we're going to charge you for the pleasure. So we still make something on it in terms of the business decision, but then we don't have to worry about sourcing something and going in terms of like a contract or a violation.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And we talked about it last night, and David Stevens said it.
David T. Stevens,
yes, said it. It's like, if your offerings are not to the level of healthiness or wellness that we want, then we should be allowed to bring it in and put that in the contract.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. And we were talking about non-alcoholic beverages options, but we also should be talking about food.
Absolutely. Especially when more and more people want to be accommodated, or I want to know the nutrition facts for the food that you're serving.
Right.
Because I want to ensure that, maybe not going as far as like, what are all the macros and the sugars and the carbs, and people really need that. We can provide that in a certain way. But understand it, like, I want to ensure that there's a balance of healthy fats. I want to ensure there's a balance of protein, but animal-based protein and non-animal-based protein options. Like, I want to work with you to ensure that the food that we're providing fuels the body of the people who are coming, versus this is just food.
Right.
And I think that's really where the difference is. And again, doing more with less. If you're going to find a way to charge me an arm and a leg, then you better be providing what I need, and not just being able to blanket charge.
Right. Yeah.
You and I also had a conversation on another podcast. I was just chiming in because you're on LinkedIn Live and was trolling. But it was, okay, fine. So if you're going to charge me an arm and a leg, I'm going to put a clause in my contract that if you go against what we have agreed on, if this is a nut-free event because of my customers, and you disregard that, or you don't inform your staff, or you don't inform the kitchen, and you make a mistake or don't provide that, then there will be a financial penalty on my end, because I'm not going to pay for that anymore. All of a sudden, if we take that power back and say, we're going to shift it, that if you do not adhere, you pay for the privilege. And I bet you, when we start pushing back to say, you are not doing what you're contracted to do, and there's a financial penalty, then the business will start to pick up from there and pay attention.
Well, I mean, and there's so many times, and if you've never negotiated a hotel contract, bless you.
Yeah. It's like, we all need legal training now.
We do. We all do need the legal training. And that's why we've got Joshua Grimes and everyone on our side. But it's really making sure that everybody has a win. And a lot of times, and I'm not bashing hotels, I mean, the contract is written on their behalf, right? For your benefit. But we need to make sure that it's in our best interest as well, our clients and or us who are signing that contract. And that does come down to that, because if you're not adhering to that, to what you've agreed to, then we should also get compensation, because right now, if we fail to do something, we owe you.
Exactly. Yeah. And so it was like, but why wouldn't it go the other way? I mean, like, if you have a contractor coming in to provide services and they don't provide services, you don't pay for those services. Right. So why in our industry do we not, as the customer, have the same power? Right. And give up so much of that power to the catering companies or the hotels or those providers? Like, if you fail to do what I'm paying you to do, I'm entitled not to pay you. Or I'm entitled to withhold money. And I think that's where we need to go. Hotels are like, well, we need everything up front. And it's like, no, I'm withholding 25% of the final payment until it's ensured that you have met the letter of our agreement. Right. Because I don't have to pay you for something that you're not going to do right. I need to be assured that you've done it. And again, we need to push back as the industry to say, we also have power, and you need to provide the service appropriately and within these legal guidelines that we're agreeing on. Right. And if you don't, that money gets withheld. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And just on that note, because it is, a lot of contracts do say that you have to pay 100% upfront for your meeting at your event. And
But push back, like start the conversation,
Right.
because remember, all contracts are negotiable.
Right.
Or an opening to a negotiation.
Exactly.
And if it means that you have to talk to the legal team, if it means that you need to have someone advocate for you, have the conversation.
Right.
Have the powerful conversation, because it's the conversations that shift that behavior change.
Right.
And if we don't advocate for our side of the industry, especially when it comes down to food and beverage, especially when it comes down to the health and safety of our attendees, then they're going to continue to have that power, and the ecosystem is going to continue to driving towards only what is profitable instead of what is healthy and safe and beneficial to our clients.
And I want it to be profitable, but I want it to be fair and safe and inclusive.
Right. And that's the balance we need to strike, especially in terms of inclusivity. At the event that we were at in August, what I loved about the menu is that no one had to raise their hand and say, oh, I'm sorry, I need, because we've trained people who need to be included, or whose menu choices, preferences, religious preferences, dietary preferences, or actual safety preferences or needs. We've trained them to apologize for needing that.
Right.
Well, I
sorry, I need a gluten-free meal. Like I should,
whether it's a preference or this is a health mandate, like I will be sick at your event if I don't eat this way. Why are we training them to apologize versus including them?
Right.
And it's not just vegan, vegetarian, gluten-free, which should at minimum always be a part of your dietary preferences and reference there, but gluten-free in terms of celiac versus preference, nut-free. I stopped doing most shellfish and pork at all of the menus I did when I was still working with clients, because those are the two things that tend to have, whether it's a religious preference or whether it's an actual anaphylactic, that it just stopped being on part of my menus.
Wait, say that again?
So shellfish.
And
pork.
Mm-hmm.
Not to say there's anything wrong, like had bacon for breakfast. But when it comes down to those types of preferences or major food allergies, those were things that I sort of trained myself just to not have.
And my religious based.
And they're mostly religious based. And again, like no one had to be like, oh my God, there's something in this that I can't have. And I just sort of trained myself to have my menus automatically be more inclusive. We were at Caesars and sat down to a plated lunch. And what I realized is that the plated lunch was completely vegan.
Right.
But not like, oh, it's vegan and we're being cool. It was like, this is a beautifully thought out, healthy lunch. It was gazpacho and there was this like beautiful hearts of palm, kind of a crab cake, but it was a beautiful luncheon, but it was balanced. It was protein. It was vegetables. It had healthy fats. It was gorgeously plated. I took a picture of every single plate we had because it was visually stunning.
And that's what makes you want to eat it.
Yeah. And it was like we were all salivating and there was a menu to say like, this is what we were having, but it wasn't labeled. But in that powerful discussion luncheon, which was made to connect us on a human level, to be vulnerable, to have powerful conversations, no one had to interrupt, remove themselves and say, I need to be accommodated.
Right.
And what that was so beautiful is that the belonging that instilled in the event without anyone having to feel like they were left out was really lovely. And at dinner, there was a meat option.
Right.
You could have the steak or you could opt for vegetarian. But so the meat eaters weren't ostracized for having that be a preference or something that they still enjoy. But like we had at David's event last night, it's like, I don't have to exclude myself, that the options are just there. And whichever option you prefer that night. And maybe like today, I don't prefer to eat red meat. Maybe I'm not feeling well, or I just want to eat something more lean. I have a longer trip to go on. Your preferences and your choices for that day, whether they shift, are already included. And I was thinking, I've never felt so, I don't want to use the word healthy at that event in August, but I felt I didn't have any brain fog. My body didn't feel sluggish. I didn't have digestive issues. It was so thoughtful that I felt powered, fueled. I didn't have to think about what I was eating. There was plentiful choices. It came out at regular intervals to keep your blood sugar up. And it was fun and it was beautiful. And I remember thinking, I think this cracked the code for food and beverages at meetings and events.
It did. I did have to ask for my gluten-free dessert at lunch, but my server was so well educated on what it was. And he's like, we have this absolutely fantastic gluten-free thing. And he came back and he goes, oh, I see you liked it. Because I ate the whole thing. It was so good. But I appreciated the fact that he knew how to answer the questions and what to do.
So educated.
Yeah.
And I think especially when we need to go to certain staff points, a lot of issues I find in that communication breakdown is that there is a certain amount of staff that is permanent or regular employees right at the end. And that when you go to these massive ones and they go to staffing agencies, the not permanent staff, the brought in staff, I don't want to call them rental staff, but the ones who aren't naturally there, they come in and they're just, again, working with that sort of automaton, like, I just need to bring food out. I just need to put it here. I just need to clear plates. And it's like, they're very like segmented jobs, but they're not educated.
Right.
And that's where that communication breaks down to say, is this gluten-free? Is this kosher? Does this have nuts? Does this have pork in it? And they go, I don't know.
Right.
And they have to run and find someone. And it's that whisper down the lane. And again, at the very least, every single person needs to be educated.
Right.
And
bring them in 30 minutes earlier.
Yeah.
Than to give them that education, give them the tools to do their job. And I posted this last year. I went to an event that's happening next week and we were in Louisville and none of the servers spoke English. And I'm okay with that. Right. But give them the tools to do their job. And what I had to do was I actually had to open up my Google Translate and ask the question. And when they read it, they're like, oh, okay, cool. Yeah. And they went and got it. But let them know, say, hey, you might be asked this, or let the attendees know how to ask for that. Right?
Absolutely.
Because I want them to succeed.
Or if you need to change the staffing design in terms of maybe whether it's a language barrier or whether it's staff that comes in on a rotating basis and that's not their regular gig, which is fine. That's a big part of our ecosystem is being able to move around within our third parties. Like you think like Sodexo's or Airmarks, which have staff that move around to event based on capacity and need. Yep. They still need to be educated. So maybe it's you have a floor manager who's there. You think with the casino, you have dealers and you have pit bosses and you have floor managers. There's a tier. If someone needs to stand at the buffets and they're the ones who answer questions and aren't educated, it's like you can ask that gentleman right there or that madam right there, and they'll be able to appropriately then have that person just there and available. Right. Ask me if you have questions. Right. And at the very least, when did we get away from labeling the menus and the menu cards? Like, if you're going to go ahead and print them, put the information there. Have one poster that has, these are all the dietary restrictions. I was just at an event in Poland, actually, and because we were closed systems, so
they have a much stricter rules.
They do, and everything was vegetarian. It was blanketed. It was like, there will be no meat served. We're going to take care of your animal-based proteins. Like, you'll be well fed. And we really were. But every single thing they numbered it. So like if gluten-free shellfish, and it was at this big menu board and it was when these numbers correspond, they're on every single card. So if you know kind of what number you're looking for, these are things that are very labeled, and it was very thoughtful. But they also listed, here's where everything came from. So this is from so-and-so's farm. And they added some fun labels like, well, this is the chef's, her grandmother used to make this for her as a treat. So we're sharing it with you. And it added this emotional element to that as well. But the labeling was so well done that if everyone was included in the labeling and everyone was able to share
awesome.
That with us.
I want to give a shout out here to, let's see who's online here. We've got Sam Korf, Adia, my friend from Atlanta, Susheta, who was my guest on today's Thursday. She was my guest on Tuesday, and go back and listen to that. And then Mice and Andrea. Thank you for joining us on Instagram. Hey.
So nice to see you all. Thanks for joining us.
Yes, thank you for joining us. And I love, and I've been to events in Poland as well. And European Union actually has a much stricter regulations on unpackaged food, meaning our buffets. And that's been around for 10 years now. We're slowly getting there in some states here. But I mean, we're at IMAX and I went through the buffets yesterday. And they do have them on the event app. So I was able to look, but as I walked through, not a single thing on their menu yesterday for lunch was gluten-free. And at the end of the line, there were 5 culinary people standing there, front of house culinary people. And I said, okay, who picked this menu, right? And I just said, I'm about to leave because there's nothing here for me to eat. So you just lost revenue because I have to leave the show, right? And to come find out, Johanna she's the event manager for IMAX for Mandalay Bay. She's like, well, let me go talk to chef. And it comes to find out there were like 2 or 3 dishes that like one was served with the flour tortilla. Well, I just needed to get it. Everything else on the plate was gluten-free except for the flour tortilla, but it wasn't labeled that way. So chef literally brought me out a plate and said, here you go. Let me know if I can get you anything else. And I just appreciated that because but I was able to have that conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But you have the time and the space. And then I'm sure that added 5 minutes of looking, one conversation, having to go talk to chef, the food having to be brought out. And it's like, I just need to eat, especially with things like show floors and trade shows. It's like when you have time, you need to be able to go directly to food that fuels the body and leave. We're not even going to talk about the price of food here, which is, we will get to that. $22 for a turkey sandwich is something else. It's
$7 for banana.
Yeah. And it's like, I'm like, how much do I value my eating right now? It's like, I think I'll be hungry and having to make that choice, but that's neither here nor there. But like having to add the time to have the conversations versus it being a thoughtful and inclusive part. Right. I was talking to a friend, actually, Zoe Moore, who you had on the show previously, talking about diversity and inclusion in the menus. Things like we talked about diversity and inclusion in terms of potatoes, and it came down to this potato conversation. Okay. So potatoes are a food that almost everyone on the planet can eat. They're gluten-free, they're vegan, they're vegetarian.
They're very versatile.
They're versatile, which I love about eating in Poland because we have potatoes every day. And I said, one day I would like to be as versatile as the potato because it can be anything and everything to all people. Right. It is one of the most perfect foods and actually one of my favorite foods ever. So eating in Poland was my favorite thing. But we talked about how something as simple as the potato can be one of the most inclusive ways to have a menu. Because if you start with something as simple or as humble as a baked potato, but then you have this beautiful rainbow of ways to customize that potato, my inclusivity is the choices that I have. It's we're all going to enjoy and sit down and break bread with this.
And we're going to have conversations of like, what did you put on your potato?
And you're creative. And it's like small bowls of different options. If you want it to be completely veggie packed, here's broccoli, here's cauliflower, here's green onions, here's shredded carrot or like spicy salsa. Like you're like, oh, what flavors do I want? Oh, I have all this creativity. If you're like, listen, I want to get down with some bacon, or I want to make it like, here's my taco meat. I want to put cream and cheese on it. Like you can say like, I want to load this up because I want it to be tasty and unctuous and fatty and just like indulgent. But that's my choice. Right. I can choose that today. Right. I can be like, listen, I am plain Jane. I'm just going to put some butts up.
Where's radish or butter on it?
There's then I've done horseradish on potato for it. During the pandemic, I used to use sweet potatoes as instead of like tortillas for everything. So it was like, what can I use this as a base for? And I actually would do like turkey taco meat, and I would put it in a baked potato. But it was another way to add fiber, another way to add like a protein, but then it had to be a vehicle for something else. And I found that it was cheaper and more filling. But this idea that you can put something as simple as a potato on there, be creative with the toppings, you're staying within that ecosystem of purchasable items. Right. But everyone gets to go through and have their creativity.
It reminds me of the mashed potato bars. They're so good.
They're so good. But then with the mashed potatoes, it's what do you already put in them?
True.
Are you butter? Are you cheese? Are you garlic? So like, there can be that idea of like, well, now I have to ask. Right. They were so fun again with the toppings. Yes. But, Zoe and I were like, inclusivity and inclusion. I'm sorry, inclusivity like and diversity, it can be represented in something as simple as a potato. Because if I get to choose how I want to enjoy that, and you get to choose, but none of us had to opt out, raise our hands, take that time away. And it was, then our time in the buffet is valuable between humans. We are engaging. Their time breaking bread at the table is engaging. Right. And it doesn't have to take time away to say, I am other. Right. And that's what we want to avoid. That's what food and beverage and meetings should not do, is to have your guests say, I need to go eat in my car because it's a high holy day for me and the food doesn't reflect what I choose to eat. Or checking calendars. Like you see all times at sports teams now, or gentlemen who were observing watched a game so that one of the players could break his fast and get calories in his system. And they were like, we will stop because this is something you need.
That was basketball.
Was it basketball?
It was during the NCAA tournament. Yes, it was, I think, and actually it was my basketball team.
See, but that was like, that's respectful. Or if you know that when I worked at a university, one of the event dates that we chose happened to fall during, I believe it was Passover. And it was maybe later in the week, so we weren't really interrupting the more family-style seders, but ensuring that there was matzah on there, ensuring that there was kosher food. Like, this is people who will partake in this. Right. How hard is it to put a nod to what they might need to participate in, and the joy someone feels when they walk in and see, I'm already included.
Right.
I already belong.
Mm-hmm.
That dopamine rush, that anchor
Right.
in that meeting means I am now loyal to this because I am seen and I'm invited here.
Yeah.
And is that not what we all want?
Mm-hmm.
Is it not the biggest return on investment for it when we're investing in food and beverage at meetings, is to have our guests say, wow, I belong here.
Hey, my nephew just joined.
Hi, Will.
Hi, Will. How are ya? My nephew's in Oklahoma. Hello. Woohoo. That is so important. And I actually share this story a lot. So 2 years ago, I did an event. It was during Passover. That same event is happening at Passover next year as well. But I had 3 people who requested kosher, and one is Orthodox Jew. And so we had to really find the caterer that could do that.
Absolutely.
It was a challenge because a lot of caterers during Passover closed down.
Yes.
Because they're celebrating. And so we did that. She had never traveled during Passover before. So we were both learning, and I'm like looking up Keurig and Keurig pods, and all those are kosher and things like that. But the other 2 gentlemen said their level of kashrut wasn't that high. But if we had labeled the food on the buffet for the pork and the shellfish and whatever else, I could have just eliminated it all together, like you said. But having to label for the wheat, for the leavened food, they were comfortable eating off of the buffet.
Absolutely.
And I mean, looking at it from 2 different perspectives. One, I'm making them included, feeling included so they could eat there. But I also saved, by picking up the phone and talking to them, I saved my client $2,500.
And that's the thing. It's all about powerful conversations. It's about being inquisitive. And there's nothing wrong with not knowing what kosher food is and kosher for Passover and block kosher. Like, there are levels. It's like to pick up the phone on their behalf and say, thank you so much for registering. I do want to ensure that I have food for you that you're comfortable eating. Could you educate me so I don't assume I know what this means?
Right.
And what is wrong with gaining some education?
Right.
Now you have it in their toolbox. And if you know that a certain portion of your stakeholders adhere to that dietary restriction, why not save the time and just have it be part of the menu?
Right.
Like,
exactly.
Food can be delicious when it's vegan, vegetarian, when it's kosher, when it's gluten-free.
Right.
It's how do you push back? How do you work with chef and say, I don't need to work with your food and beverage director. I would like to sit down with your chef.
Right.
I would like to go over menus. I would like to say, hey, here are recipes I've used in the past. Is this something you can scale? And powerful conversations can save us money, can save us time, can save us headaches, and even can save people's lives when we're really thoughtful about what we're putting on those buffets.
100% agree. And yesterday, Trevor Lou and I were talking about the real stories behind food and beverage, what it really means. And this conversation really epitomizes that. But one thing that he said, because he's like, I make sure that all of the meats that I buy are halal, so I don't have to worry about it. So he doesn't have to go find a halal caterer or go order something special. And my friend Amelia did it as well in her corporate kitchen or cafeteria for a company. She made, because it was a tech company, she made sure everything that she was buying was halal certified so that everybody in that company who followed Muslim or could eat in it without question.
Right, without question.
Yeah.
And really the point is that we need to change the stigma of making people apologize for their religion, making people apologize for their dietary restrictions because their body needs something else, making people stop apologizing for, this is my health choice.
Right. And maybe not even choice.
No, it's like I need to eat a certain way. Diabetics need to have food that fuel them in certain ways. So not everyone wants a bacon, egg, and cheese. Like, maybe we want fruit or yogurt, or like I had stomach surgery. I have different dietary restrictions because I literally process food a different way. And I just need enough nutrients during the day to fuel my body. And if there's expectations to go through a 15-hour day on a show floor, and I have to choose, like, I really need to eat the banana. And my only access to that is to pay for buy me 50 bananas back home at the grocery store. It's like, why do I have to choose against my health and functionality and wellness against your menu or your offerings?
Right.
And how do we start to change the dialogue? And the only way we're going to get the industry to catch up is when we have those powerful conversations, with you, with now, having conversations with chef, talking to your stakeholders.
Right.
If you work for third party, talk to your planners, talk to your clients. Who's coming to this meeting?
Right.
Who are we accommodating? Do you know that information? And if you don't, before we set food and beverage, let's have a powerful conversation. And there's nothing wrong with asking questions. There's nothing wrong with educating yourself. We are more powerful when powerful conversations are had.
Exactly. And two things on that. I mean, the woman that is Orthodox Jew, I mean, I've already emailed her. I'm like, hey, are you coming? And this year she didn't come. She was having a baby.
Aww.
But she's like, thank you so much for checking in with me to see if I'm coming. And I've done that for 2025. But now my other thing went away is like having those conversations so far in advance allows everyone to be educated, allows everyone to wrap their heads around and to understand what we need and how we can all be a part of that conversation.
Absolutely.
Because we don't want to break up the experience for me to have to leave. And I know this is what popped into my head is my friend Kathy went to an event in Colorado last year, I guess, and she can't eat pork and she can't eat gluten and garlic or onions. And she was asking questions about it. And there was nothing for her to eat. And one of her friends was celiac, but she works for a government agency. And because food was included in the registration fee, she would not be reimbursed if she went out to buy the food. And so that was on her own dime. Like if she had to go out and she ended up getting a very bland piece of chicken. But we have to think about understanding the values and the financial burden that we put on our attendees if we're not thinking through and understanding them.
And when we think about designing for them, it's like, it's more than just the cost of the ticket. If you're requiring people to opt into the food, this is what you're providing. It is your obligation to ensure if they are paying for that, that there is something for them to eat.
Right.
And if they say, this is not for me, then it is your obligation to go and provide food for them or a stipend or to reimburse them that money.
Right.
And again, that is our burden. And it's not for them to have to say, I'm other and be like, it's on you. And I think Zoe told a story. There was a gentleman who brought his own bags, lunches, and he would leave the meeting and he would go eat in his car by himself. And it's like, how can you have that person pay money, want to be a part of that, that tribe for the day, of that small community to learn or to connect or to feel, to get a skill,
grow his business
and say, please go eat by yourself in the car. This is what we need to avoid. And again, it's our burden as the industry and it's a good burden to have. So let's educate, let's have the conversations and let's push it forward.
Yeah. That should not happen. And it reminds me of this kid a couple of years ago. He went on a field trip with his class and he went to Williamsburg and paid the full fare. He's anaphylactic to wheat. His dad was coming with him. They brought his own meal, right? But they paid for the meal that they were supposed to eat on the thing, but they brought their own. And the restaurateur, the server came in and said, you can't bring in your own outside for food and beverage. Well, my son's got allergies. He can't eat that. Well, the chef came out and said, I've never killed anybody yet. And so you either don't eat, sit here and don't eat. You eat the food we provide you, or you take your food outside and eat. And it was raining. And so this kid chose to go outside and eat in the rain. And then they ended up suing them. And it ended up in his favor after an appeal. But it was, food allergies are seen as a disability, and food allergies are seen as, hey, if you can't provide for us, then let us bring it in.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing. I mean, it's an invisible disability.
Right.
But it's not like people who will go into anaphylactic shock are choosing to do that. And it's like, I need you to choose to either be hungry, and you can't be hungry at a meeting. We all know, like, we get hangry. It's horrible.
Right.
Or possibly die. Like, and these are the choices we're putting on people. And yet we think they're the problem. Like, I don't, it doesn't add up.
No, it doesn't add up.
Let's not do that.
No, let's not do that. Okay. So when we met in the elevator a month ago, which is how we got this conversation started in the first place, what was the challenge that you were having with that venue in designing those menus? And did you get that resolved?
So it's fun to be on the outside designer side now to like help people see through that. And again, to have conversations with clients to say, hey, like, how are we accommodating this? I think I found the Caesars menu to be what then I used as the basis for going forward, especially when it came to like midday offerings, when people need to be fueled in between larger meals, but also in terms of quantities of food served when. And I think that was, to me, the most eye-opening part of, if we need to sit for lunch, working with, even I was just working on, all of these menus were really heavy. It was like fried chicken and burnt ends, and I had to eat it with my hands, or they had really strong smells, and I was in an enclosed room. And it was, and then going back to chef, and the custom menu that they made for me that was plated was $40 more expensive than their already $70 per person lunch.
Right.
So it was spend $70 for lunch on food that does not accommodate the event, that cannot be served non-buffet style when the physical space doesn't accommodate a buffet. So if all of your lunches are buffets in a room that you offer that can't accommodate one, where does that leave me?
Right.
Choosing a custom menu that you're going to make me pay for the privilege of using.
Wow. God.
And it was like, hold the phone. And so,
can I put you on mute for a minute while I drop some F-bombs?
So again, this person's purview is X, Y, and Z.
Right.
This person's purview is A, B, and C, and they don't meet in the middle. And it took 3 weeks for the food and beverage director and the chef to have a conversation. So now I'm like, I have to choose something because it's Tuesday for my event. And luckily, we ended up with a plated luncheon that I found acceptable, and they did accommodate the price. But a month of conversations versus you realize when you look at your buffet options that I can't put in there, that the food is so heavy and so plentiful.
Right.
One, it's going to be completely wasteful because no one can eat that much food.
Right.
It doesn't accommodate the event, and everyone has something to do. I have to train after this luncheon. It's a luncheon and training.
Right.
And if everyone's going to sit in a warm room with this heavy meal,
they're going to go,
how could I possibly activate their brain? I need lunch to be a fuel, not a deterrent, like a deterrent.
Yeah.
It ended up being okay, but it definitely was one of the more uphill conversations because the left hand and the right hand actually couldn't work in concert together.
Yeah. Well, I'm just thinking about the day of the week menus that I'm seeing a lot of now, which I love because they're making it more sustainable. It makes it more sustainable for the culinary team. But then again, nothing is labeled on there. On the bottom of it, one of them says, if you need gluten-free flour tortillas, there's a $10 upcharge per person. Right. And
for a pack, we're in the pack of tortillas.
Right.
Probably cost $8.
Exactly.
So again, it's the ecosystem of to accommodate what should be in the norm of accommodation.
Right.
For each person who needs to be accommodated. Again, you're making me set them as other. And what you're telling me with that pricing is that you see them as other.
Right.
And that is something we need to push back on in the industry. It's you saying, oh, I have to make this and have a vegetarian option. I'm going to make you pay for the privilege.
Right. Yeah. Vegetarian, vegan options should be automatically on your menu and design them to be gluten-free already.
Exactly. A vegan, vegetarian, gluten-free menu can be one beautiful plate.
Right.
You should know how to do that.
Right.
And that should be an option. Or this is everyone's option. Would you like to opt into meat?
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
What's the opposite? It's like, oh, would you like to opt into meat options at this event? It's an extra $3 a person.
Right.
That's the money driver. Protein's the most expensive part.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's we talked about mocktails or spirit-free cocktails and how...
Or what was on the wagon. Oh,
that's the table menus like that. Friends, hey, I will on the wagon. It's no, that's a disease. That's in people in recovery. That's not a joke.
Right.
Saying I choose to be vegetarian. It's hippies over here. No, let's not do that. But the idea that I want to have a beautiful mixed drink with flavors and acids and sugars and botanicals. I want it served in a beautiful glass. I want it to be an experience, the same way that you have an experience.
Right.
Not just, oh, we have lemonade and yours has vodka in it and mine doesn't. First of all, that's not a cocktail. That's a salmon drink.
Yeah.
But when you think about that experience is, I don't want my only option at an event to feel included, that it has to have booze in it. Right. Some days I just don't feel like drinking. Full disclosure, I'm on my 3rd week on the road. If you drink every night, by this time I'm not going to be functional and do the job that I'm here to do. I may choose to drink more water. I may choose to have less of a drink. I may choose to sip on a glass of wine. Right. But if everyone and every server's coming around with, do you want another drink? Do you want another drink? Do you want another drink?
Or as you get off the elevator, there's a whole tray of alcohol right in front of you. Can I give you this?
Right.
I'm with no option of anything.
Right.
else.
Or there's a beautiful pink drink with a flower in it. And it's this is spirit free. Enjoy this cocktail.
Right.
This is a spirit free cocktail, thinking about a balanced beverage that has a base, a sugar, and an acid that is mixed with intention.
Right.
The base does not have to be alcohol.
Right.
So this cocktail has alcohol. This cocktail does not.
Right.
And it's still, I get the experience.
Mm-hmm.
I have a beautiful thing that tastes good and like gets my taste buds going, gets my brain functioning. It's a treat. It's a delight. And it doesn't deter from my experience, but it's still like, wow, that's delicious.
Yeah.
And the thing is, cocktails are delicious because of a balance of flavors, a balance of sugars and acids mixed together. They just happen to have their base be a spirit that in and of itself is a flavor component.
Right.
So cocktails should be one or the other.
Right. Yeah. And they're curated just like a plate of food is curated. Mm-hmm. And we need to, I was having an argument with, well, not an argument, a discussion with a guy that runs the beverages at an airport, which I get. They have a smaller space. Their bar doesn't hold a lot. But he's like, I'm not going to remove the Kettle One to put up a spiritless, right? Because I'm making so much more money on that. Well, it's not about removing. And even with this entire conversation of allergies and whatever, and alcohol, it's not about removing. It's about providing an option.
Right. It's like we say when we're outing design or designing events with clients, they're like, well, I don't have more time to do that. I'm like, I'm not asking you to take more time. Mm-hmm. I'm asking you to see how you spend your time. And if you can spend your time more wisely, the ROI is better. So it's how do you think about what's on that bar? How do you think about it's not more, it's not removing, it's not either or.
Right.
It's this needs to be a part of the foundation.
Right.
And when it's a part of the foundation, actually everything flows more smoothly towards that return on investment. And my return on investment with, let's say, your events and I want to come to your event.
Right.
If I'm included, if everything is labeled, if I already feel like I belong because I don't have to remove myself or go eat in the car,
right.
I think like, wow, I'm seen here. I belong. And it's not because I fit in, which means I choose to be other or carve myself away. It's that me as my most authentic self is seen and appreciated.
Right.
That loyalty that's created because you belong, that's customer loyalty.
Right.
That's repeat customers. That is repeat income. Mm-hmm. So if it's a part of the foundation, it actually has a higher return on investment for both.
Right.
And if in the end, we go back to our beginning conversation about a business ecosystem, it's not about removing something. It's about having everyone be a part of the ecosystem and being able to get their money as well as the other people who you're used to accommodating.
Right. Love that. It did remind me of a story. And where are we? Oh, we're 43 minutes. We could talk for hours. Yeah. All right. So I'm going to.
Unless you're at a trade show.
Right. I got to go to work. What do you need to go work? So it does remind me of a story. And this is probably 10 years ago. And I was talking at a hotel up in Northern Virginia. And it was a transient hotel mostly, right? And it was a meeting, professionals international meeting, chapter meeting. And the chef and I had a conversation and he said, there's a gentleman that comes here. He spends Monday through Friday here and then he flies home on the weekend. He has food allergies. We take care of him. He's told us in advance, but he's there like every single week. Well, in the summer, he brings his family for 2 months and they all have allergies. And he's like, and we're making pancakes and we're doing this with his kids. And I'm like, so for those sales managers out there and the catering sales managers or the catering event managers,
right?
When you get that, think about the heads and beds that hotel just made.
Absolutely.
Right? So food and beverage, it's not just about that minimum you're trying to meet, right? It's about making that experience and making sure those people who are in that hotel room, they're your guests. They're not my attendees. They are my attendees, but they're also your guests. And you're making an impression on them. And do you want them to come back?
Yeah. Like if it's all about the dollar, it's about making, if I belong, like take my money.
Right.
Because I'd rather spend it with you. I maybe even choose to spend a little bit more.
Right.
But I will spend it where I belong. I feel seen and I'm accommodated.
Right.
And then I'm going to tell everyone I know, oh, I love going here. I love flying this airline. I love going to that event.
Right.
What do we know hits more? That positive, that repetition, that share, that expansion nets you more money.
Right.
So if it all goes back to the dollar, the accommodation is actually worth more than the upcharge and the not doing it. Or if we let you bring in an $8 bag of gluten-free tortillas and everyone feels seen, they may choose to come back more and more.
Right.
So again, if it goes back to the dollar, it actually is more profitable to be inclusive than it is to not.
Yes. Awesome. Okay. One final question for you.
Yes.
That I ask everybody. Thinking about food and beverage, safety, sustainability, and inclusive. What does that mean? In a nutshell.
In a nutshell, it means that the foundation and the offerings that are out for everyone automatically include everyone without them having to opt out. So if you're having a meal that, and again, it's hard to please everybody, but there's a difference between pleasing and there's a difference between being inclusive. And inclusive means that whatever my preferences are, whatever my requirements are, and whatever my restrictions are, that they're already seen. And that means I am seen. And in that seeing and belonging creates trust and loyalty. And that's what the sustainability, inclusion, and the safety means, is that I'm already a part of the whole. I'm already a part of the community, because that's what events are. They're building micro communities.
Right.
And what you don't want is to tell someone you're not included.
Okay, let's see. Connect with Devon.
Yes, please connect with me on
LinkedIn.
Let's have conversations about creatively getting your events sustainable, including people in your events, having conversations about belonging, inclusivity, and designing for that as well.
And you can also follow her. Look at the show ticker down here at Duchess Monty Pasha on Instagram.
Yes.
So
Always fun.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tracy.
Thank you. Everybody, this is my last episode from IMAX. I will be on a plane tonight to go home. Next week, I will be in Arizona. I'm actually going to be on Thursday because I'm going to be kayaking the Grand Canyon on Wednesday. Yeah.
Sounds fun. Don't forget about.
I know. I promise you. Yeah. So hopefully I'll be on Thursday. But I will be with you next Thursday, and we're going to talk about World Food Day, which is the day before on Wednesday. So until then, stay safe and eat well.
Eat well.
Bye. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Eating at a Meeting podcast, where every meal matters. I'm Tracy Stuckrath, your food and beverage inclusion expert. Call me and let's get started right now on creating safe and inclusive food and beverage experiences for your customers, your employees, and your communities. Share the podcast with your friends and colleagues at our Eating at a Meeting Facebook page and on all podcast platforms. To learn more about me and receive valuable information, go to tracystuckrath.com. And if you'd like more information on how to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line, then visit eatingatameeting.com.